Today, we will learn that M&M has been around since the early 20th century and has very positive roots.
But many aspects of the M&M process can be caustic to the presenter.
We can do this better by intentionally picking cases, presenters, and creating a safe space to learn together.
I remember sitting as a medical student in my first M&M conference. It was during my surgery rotation, and because of that, my adrenaline was already high from just being in that world. I was in the VA hospital, and the case was being presented by one of the surgery residents on my team. He was a guy that I looked up to. He was confident, easygoing, the kind of resident you wanted to emulate. The patient was an older veteran who had come in with bilious vomiting and excruciating abdominal pain. The team suspected an obstruction, so surgery was consulted. But as the case unfolded, it became clear that something much more rare, that proverbial zebra, was at play here. The patient had developed a severe necrotizing colitis due to a really super uncommon bacterial infection, something so rare that even the attendings in the room had barely encountered it. The patient ultimately required a massive bowel resection. The resident presented the case methodically, factually. He walked us through the images, the thought process, and the ultimate diagnosis. He even managed to pull it all together with a few key learning points, stuff that I had never heard of but found fascinating. I was honestly engaged. I was learning. I was inspired. And then the firing squad opened up. First, the senior residents took their shots. They picked apart the case, questioning his decisions, each trying to subtly prove that they would have done it differently, that they would have caught it sooner. Then the more junior attendings stepped in, turning up the heat. And finally, the senior attendings made sure that there was no doubt this had been a case gone wrong. And while the infection was rare, they implied that if they had been there, it would have gone differently. I sat there, adrenaline surging, not for the patient, but for the resident. My heart was pounding, my hands were sweating. I glanced down at my scrubs and saw giant sweat stains. This was going to be a long day. What started as an impressive case study turned into something else entirely. I wasn't learning anymore. I was terrified. I remember thinking, I never want to be in front of that firing squad. Ever. Welcome to EM Pulse, bringing research and expert opinion to the bedside.
We're your hosts, Sarah Medeiros
and Julia Magaña.
Welcome back to EM Pulse. M&M presentations have been a hallmark of medicine since the early 20th century. Now, if you're not in medicine, M&M stands for Morbidity and Mortality. This is a session where doctors review cases with unexpected complications, errors, or deaths, and learn to improve patient care. Typically, a case is presented in a public setting of your peers. The audience is presented with the details of a case, decisions made, system factors, and human errors. And then the audience asks questions, makes suggestions, and often comes to a conclusion on how that case was handled. Ideally, solutions are discussed, such as process changes, training improvements, or new protocols to enhance patient safety.
And I think on one hand, it's really impressive that we as a profession want so badly to do better that we put our mistakes out there in such a public forum. It can be a really amazing way for everyone to learn from individual mistakes, identify system errors, and be collectively better as a group and individually. On the other hand, it is humbling. Humiliating even to get up in front of your colleagues to reckon with your mistakes in such a public forum. It can feel like a public flogging and sometimes even change us for the worse. Like, now I want to scan every child that walks through the door for a PE or something because I'm worried I will miss it based on one weird case, which isn't the right thing either.
Or it can emotionally impact us, scar us, so to speak. But the ACGME has required M&M to be a part of training since 1990. So, to discuss this complicated topic, we brought in our friend and colleague, Dr. Jaymin Patel, assistant professor of emergency medicine at UC Davis and assistant program director.
Jaymin, you actually pitched us this idea. Why is this an important topic to you?
Yeah, M&M, and more broadly speaking, how physicians deal with and learn from adverse outcomes is a really important topic to me because I think it's an important part of medical training that is either poorly taught or taught the wrong way. As you mentioned off the top, M&M is the House of Medicine's way of ensuring that trainees get the opportunity to intimately dissect an adverse patient outcome. Often, it is the trainee's own case that they present in front of the firing squad that you depicted earlier. To me, if one of the junior physicians in the department has to stand up and speak honestly and candidly about their mistakes, there should be nothing but encouragement and applause at the end of the presentation if the trainee is able to grapple with their case in a meaningful way. And yet, instead, the trainee gets systematically peppered with questions and Monday morning quarterbacking that would make most sports talk show hosts blush.
It's a great analogy, Jaymin.
A lot of these have like weird Jaymin analogies, so get ready for more. I think back not only to my experience with M&M in residency, but also a specific case I had in my third year of residency. This case happened after I had already presented at M&M, and so I didn't formally present it during residency, but it was an older gentleman presenting with angioedema, or critical swelling of the airway, likely to being on an ACE inhibitor. Our initial exam had his tongue completely swollen, lips were swollen. He was able to talk and was breathing okay, actually. My attending and I decided to do a nasopharyngoscopy to look at the supraglottic space and the airway and see whether or not this patient needed to be emergently intubated or whether or not he could be managed more conservatively. Well, long story short, the supraglottic space was also very edematous. We decided to proceed with nasopharyngeal intubation, but I failed at that because I pushed paralytics before securing the airway with an ET tube. The patient ended up needing an emergent cricothyrotomy, which I did, but not before he was critically hypoxic for a long period of time. He went up to the OR with ENT, and throughout my shift, and even by the end of it, I had no idea whether or not this patient was okay. I felt awful about not doing the nasopharyngeal intubation correctly. And after my shift ended, after I'd finished writing all my notes for the day, no one talked to me about it. Even in the next few days, I had to seek others out to talk about what had happened. One of my favorite quotes on TV is from BBC's Sherlock, where Sherlock Holmes' character says, "There are no ghosts in this world, save those that we make for ourselves." That patient encounter stuck with me like a ghost for days and weeks afterwards. And so it struck me, we force our trainees to do a formal M&M presentation about an adverse outcome. And yet when something like that happens in real time, the trainee is left to seek out help on their own? That didn't sit right with me.
Yeah, totally. So can you tell us a little bit more about the history of the M&M?
Yeah, I had to look this up as I delved deeper into why we do M&M the way we do. As with most historical things in medicine, it starts with a physician who worked in the Northeast United States. The idea for case logs in M&M originates from a surgeon, Dr. Ernest Codman, who worked at Massachusetts General Hospital. Not going to give everyone a full history lesson here, but Dr. Codman's work is recognized as the basis for things like the Joint Commission and M&M. I think in some ways, M&M actually does work. In the traditional M&M setup, trainees are encouraged to examine all causes of the adverse outcome, called a root cause analysis. This includes examining issues such as systems problems or equipment failures, of which the trainee bears no actual responsibility. I think that this process, which allows the trainee to look at all of the factors involved in the case, both things that were in their control and out of their control, is essential in allowing someone to learn from the experience. In addition, the idea that physicians should keep track of their cases, their patients, their treatments, their diagnoses, their dispositions, in order to learn from outcomes is backed by both literature and logic. In my opinion, a physician who is able to structure their practice in a way that allows them to meaningfully reflect on both positive and negative outcomes is going to benefit greatly. So I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. I think the current model of M&M, at least how it's generally practiced in medicine, is broken for two main reasons. Number one is that we do not have an effective way of creating a culture of psychological safety. You talk to most trainees who are preparing to present at M&M, and they are almost invariably worried about how people's perceptions about them will change, and rightly so. I'm not an expert at how to create psychological safety so that sharing mistakes and having a collective learning process becomes a positive experience for both the presenter and the audience. However, I think I would start with one simple solution, which is that faculty at academic departments should present their own M&Ms. At the very least, they should co-present with their trainees, and I see no reason why only trainees should present at M&M. Reason number 2 why I think our current M&M structure is broken lies in the name itself, morbidity and mortality. Obviously, when we are talking about mortality, we're talking about the patient's mortality. If it occurred in the case, we talk about it. And obviously, we cover morbidity in the same vein. However, why do we never talk about the provider's morbidity? We talk about scars, both seen and unseen, that we caused in our patients. But what about those that are left on ourselves? I would love to know why we never ask each other, hey, how did it feel to have to work through this adverse outcome? How did you come out of it? How did you change your practice? Tell me something about the ghost that you created for yourself as a result of this case.
I think that's a really great point, Jaymin. And I think that, you carry that patient with you. And I think if you talk to any physician who's been practicing for a very short time period, and they have patients that they carry with them as well, those ghosts or those scars, do you think that it is a healthy or an unhealthy way to learn from those misadventures by carrying those scars with us?
I think it's healthy. I know that might be a controversial statement because obviously the ghosts or the scars that we're talking about, they can be a significant source of pain and anxiety. I don't want to sound like I'm not aware of that fact. Nevertheless, I think if you take a step back and accept that the lessons we take from the mistakes that we make are valuable, the memories they leave with us, the imprints that are visible on our practice, they can be manifestations of growth. I'll draw an example from one of my favorite pieces of literature, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. I'm sure most people have either read the book or seen a movie on it. But in the book, the main character is visited by 3 ghosts. The ghost of Christmas past, which reminds the main character, Mr. Scrooge, that he wasn't always the contemptuous and bitter person that he became. The ghost of Christmas present shows Mr. Scrooge that through generosity and giving people the benefit of the doubt, he could make a substantial impact on people's lives. Those 2 ghosts are positive influences, the type of ghosts that I think if we were going to make for ourselves, we could utilize to improve and grow. But the ghost of Christmas yet to come in the book is this shadowy, haunting figure. That ghost shows Scrooge several scenes of horror and doom to the point that he has to beg the ghost to stop. This is what I would compare to the blame and shame culture of how we currently do M&M. We say, you messed up, look at all the bad stuff that's happening now. But that's just a scare tactic. It's not empowering. It's not comforting. There's no sense of community. There's no support structure. It's like using a sledgehammer to break down a door instead of turning a key.
Yeah, I have definitely felt that third ghost. So, Jaymin, are most M&Ms anonymous at this point? Should they be?
Yeah, the question of anonymity is an interesting one. In a recent survey of academic emergency medicine programs, only about 1/4 incorporated anonymity into their M&M structures. I'm conflicted about this. On one hand, I can see how anonymity would benefit the idea of M&M because you would be taking the individual out of the firing line. Maybe that generates more patient and system-centered conversations. But on the other hand, I think if we had better systems in place to ensure psychological safety and foster a sense of support, we wouldn't need anonymity at all in order to make an effective M&M process.
I was just at a pediatric M&M and they did a case that was like 3 or 4 years older so that it was more of like a case study and they were talking about it and learning from it and they brought all the different specialists in to talk about it. But they literally wanted no one there that had been involved in that case. And I thought that was an interesting process, but it kind of cleanses it of that personal learning process, right? By like not having anyone there. And also you can't make changes for the system. Now it's back to that case that I had of that weird bacterial. And you're like, oh, now I know about this weird bacteria that causes necrotizing enterocolitis, So there are some advantages and there are some disadvantages. So, Jaymin, that's obviously one model. Are there any particular models that you suggest, or are there principles that we can take from these models, if not a specific one, to apply to our own programs?
Yeah, as I said earlier, I don't think I hold all the answers here. Rethinking M&M is a topic that I think many smart people are working on, and we'll kind of see what research and ideas come about in the near future. However, I'll take a stab at the question anyways. There are existing published models out there, all of which I think hit the right note in terms of trying to foster more inclusive discussions and decentralize the conversation away from the presenter. A few key points here that I think work well from these models. I think having a senior faculty member be in charge of M&M in order to facilitate case selection, presentation design, and discussion is a real positive influence on the whole process. And I think pre-briefing the audience about the goals and objectives of the session is also potentially really valuable. To add to that, I think having trainees reflect thoughtfully on their own morbidity is an untapped area where I think there's potential for great rewards. For the individual, I would advise that if the culture at your institution is supportive, try to be honest about your reflections about the case and your decision-making. Take some time to reflect on not only the case itself, but the impact it had on you as a person and as a physician. Learn and teach from your mistakes. Water the plants around you.
What I'm hearing, the basic principles are pulling in timely, important cases intentionally, having a faculty member organize everything, and ideally having the faculty member that was a part of that case be present, be a part of that presentation at a minimum if they're not the primary ones presenting, and fostering a supportive environment to help that individual work through those tough moments. And I think another important piece of this is that we can use M&M to make system changes. You know, I was recently a part of our own M&M, and we're getting ready to have a multidisciplinary meeting to revamp one of our triage protocols because of it. And while that is a ghost I am definitely going to carry with me, I feel very positive about that process because there's going to be a change. And I know that it's a mistake other people could have made as well. And it's something positive coming out of it. Outside of the M&M process, Jaymin, what are some of your tips that you've learned along the way on how to deal with the emotional impact of these misadventures?
Yeah, I think as you noted, Julia, about your own recent experience with an M&M in our department, I think that the way that we frame these conversations is super important. I think as a trainee, you should tap into some of the resources that you have around you in order to externalize some of your thoughts, lean on those people that have been there for you before in order to just talk through the case, have a little bit of commiseration if that's what you need at the time.
Jaymin, I would agree with you that, you know, as a trainee, talking to my fellow trainees was a very healthy thing. But it was when I actually went to somebody who had been through this before and a little bit more experience and started processing with them that I got more out of these moments, and those ghosts did not haunt me as voraciously, you know, because I had a different framework to see things through instead of what I was creating this vortex in my own head about those experiences. So I think it's really important that we don't just talk among our own peer selves, but if you have something that legitimately didn't go the way that you want it to go, talking to somebody else that has more experience can be really helpful.
Yeah, especially if that person with more experience can approach it in a way that's like, hey, you know, I've been through this before.
Yes.
Here are my examples of feeling the same way that you are feeling right now. And I can be part of the process that helps you through this. And that can obviously start with a faculty member that's assigned to be the M&M person, right? The person who runs M&M for the department, as I said earlier, picks cases, facilitates the discussion. But also, I think the faculty members or the educators at large should have a culture in place where everyone is invested, right? So everyone is expected to help present an M&M case when it is one of their cases. I think that aside from sessions where trainees present M&M, faculty members on their own should also present M&M cases. Because unless you construct an environment where everyone is treated on equal footing, no matter if they are a PGY1 or a seasoned attending, unless you have that sort of culture already established in a program, it's going to be hard to break down some of the barriers that already exist when thinking about M&M and the type of impact it has on not only trainees, but medicine in general.
So if you are a leader in either residency or you're a more senior person inside of your department, even if you're not involved in M&M and you have a colleague who has gone through a tough situation, use this as a moment to reach out and talk through it in a safe way with them and help them find solutions and positive ways to deal with that moment. Is that a fair summary, Jaymin?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it really does have to be a top-down culture change in terms of creating a safe space and bringing some of that positivity in terms of how we can make changes from these cases.
Well, that's it for now on the M&M process. You know, just telling that story at the beginning, Jaymin, gave me an adrenaline jolt. Only now can I feel myself just starting to calm down. So thanks, Jaymin, for walking us through this.
And in the meantime, thank you to our department for doing this better than I saw it happen during training.
And thank you to OM Productions for making this a safe place to make our many mistakes and help edit them out.
So until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and stay tuned.
The opinions shared on EM Pulse are those of our hosts and guests. They don't necessarily reflect the views of UC Davis Emergency Medicine, UC Davis Health, or any of their parent organizations.